is Judy at Judy in the Kitchen. Today I'm going to show you how to make a fabulous side dish with a butternut squash and an apple. The first thing we want to do is roast the butternut squash, and I showed how to do this in another video, so I'll just do a quick rerun on that. First, we're going to preheat the oven to 400 degrees, and then I'm going to take a very sharp knife and cut off both ends. And then I'm going to split the butternut squash down this way, remove the seeds, coat everything inside and out with extra virgin olive oil, and then I'm going to put it cut side down on a baking sheet that I've lined with parchment paper. You could just oil the baking sheet if you want. You don't have to use the parchment paper. And then I'm going to roast it in the oven at 400 degrees for roughly 30 minutes. That time is going to vary depending upon the size of your squash, but I'm going to test it by putting a fork on this end, not this end, because the flesh is a lot thinner down here. So here, I don't want this to be mushy because we're going to have some chunks in our final dish, but you want it to be fork tender, just not mushy like mashed potatoes. And so roughly 30 minutes, maybe more depending upon the size. And I'll get back with you when this is in the oven. My squash is in the oven, and so now I'm getting my apple ready. And this is that apple that I showed you earlier. It's just a red delicious apple. And yes, you can use it in this recipe. You can use any kind of apple that you want. This is just what I had on hand. It was a pretty good size one. To this apple that I've cut up and peeled, I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of lemon juice and 2 tablespoons of water. And we're just going to stir this up, and that's just going to keep the apple from turning while the squash is roasting. Now, you don't want to bypass this step because we're going to use this liquid when we actually cook the dish and prepare it a little one step further. So you just want to set this aside and wait for the butternut squash to cook, and in the meantime you can be working on the rest of your meal, whatever is going with it. My squash is roasted, and you can see it is fork tender, but it is not mushy at this point, at least not down this way. This side is going to be a lot softer because the flesh is thinner. Now I'm just going to allow them to cool on the pan for a little bit, just like they are, while I start the apples. Alright, now you can see we're at the stove, and I've got a small pan warming up over a little more than medium heat. To that I'm going to add roughly 2 tablespoons of butter, and this is going to be all the butter we're going to use in this entire dish. This is flexible. You can make it your way, add more, add less, whatever you want, but I want that to melt. And I don't even have to wait for it to melt all the way. To this, I'm going to add the apples with the water and the lemon juice. I'm not going to drain them off or rinse them or anything like that. I want that in there. And then I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of honey. Not a lot. And again, this is flexible. You can make this your way. You don't have to add any sweetener to it, but I think this dish kind of calls for it. It just enhances it and makes it just that much better. Now, you don't have to add honey. You can add brown sugar. You can add regular sugar. You can add maple syrup, maple sugar, agave nectar, whatever you want. And to that, I'm going to add a generous sprinkling of cinnamon. And you can see that was generous because, again, this is going to season the butternut squash. And so this amount of cinnamon here is not going to be just for these apples, but it's going to be for the entire dish. Now, you can see that we're basically stewing these apples. We don't want to do this too long, or else they're going to turn into applesauce, and we don't want that. So I'm going to let it come to a boil, which you see it's already doing, and I'm going to let it cook for probably about 2 minutes, 3 minutes at the most. And while this is cooking, I'm going to go back to the butternut squash, and we're going to cut it up. Alrighty, I am back at the butternut squash. I've turned them over. You can see they're still plenty hot and they're steaming. Just to make it easier, I'm going to cut that right there. And what I want to do is just get this squash out of the peel and leave it in as many chunks as I can without having something like a mashed potato. Now this end here is much thinner, so it's going to wind up being pretty much like mashed potatoes anyway, but we want some chunks in there, and so that's what this side is going to be like. So I'm going to just kind of slice it a little bit and then cut it across into roughly bite-sized pieces and just scoop it off of there and put it in my bowl. You can see this dish really is not hard to make at all. It's just not hard to make. Takes a little bit of time with the roasting, but you can do that while you're preparing the rest of your meal. So it's really a very convenient thing to do. You can see I'm just scooping those chunks in there, and I'll be right back with you when I have both halves done. Okay, you can see I've got all this taken care of. There are chunks in here and bits that are kind of mashed from the seed side of it. That's okay. We want some texture in this dish. Okay, so now we can see that my apples are nicely stewed. They still have some texture to them. My little sauce here has thickened up some. We're just going to pour everything, juice and all, right into the squash. And then we're just going to lightly toss it, and then it's ready to serve. And it's so good. And you see it makes quite a bit. And that was not a huge butternut squash, but yet this is very, very tasty. And again, you can vary it your way. Use more apples, use more or less cinnamon, whatever kind of sweetener, if any, that you want to use. You can just make it your way, and it's really delicious. As you can see, this dish really is not hard to make. It doesn't take a whole lot of effort. Let me encourage you to try it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. This is Judy at Judy in the Kitchen. Have a great day.